I mean, it's an understatement to say that this is disgusting and that it's horrific.
We now have details describing what police say was a daily dose of severe abuse at the hands of his adoptive parents, Jonathan and Christina Miranda.
It all began on a street in northeast San Antonio that night in the driveway. A woman's cries desperately for help. Paramedics moved quickly toward the house. They disappeared through the front door, but within minutes, the rush slowed, and the energy shifted from rescue to something heavier. Then, 2 officers emerged, carrying a small black body bag, the size of a child. Conversation stopped, and the woman who had been crying collapsed again to the ground, her voice breaking in disbelief. That night, no one on Cielo Ranch Drive knew who the child was, or how long he had suffered behind that door. They didn't know that inside that suburban home, a laundry room had become a place of confinement. And by the next morning, the story had a name, 10-year-old Michael Miranda, and the couple who had called themselves his parents, Jonathan and Christina Miranda, were no longer at home. Within hours, their names were everywhere, not for charity, not for adoption, but for accusation. Because the boy found lifeless in that house wasn't just another child in need of help. Investigators said he had lived his final months in conditions they struggled to describe. And the question that followed haunted everyone who heard his name. But how did 2 parents who once promised a second chance by adoption end up charged with capital murder? And what really happened to Michael Miranda? But before we begin, if you find this video interesting, please give it a like at the end and tell me what you think about the case. It really helps the channel. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe for more. Thank you. This video was created solely for educational and documentary purposes. It does not endorse, glorify, or condone any of the criminal actions or individuals described in this case. Viewer discretion is advised. It was 9:22 p.m. on September 24th, 2025, when dispatchers sent San Antonio police and paramedics to 5600 Cielo Ranch Drive. The caller reported a child who wasn't breathing. When first responders arrived, the house looked ordinary. 2 cars in the driveway, porch light on, toys scattered near the yard. Officers stepped inside and immediately sensed that something had gone terribly wrong. Down a short hallway, they found 10-year-old Michael Miranda lying on the floor of a narrow laundry room. He wasn't moving, and his skin looked pale, and his small frame appeared weak, almost weightless in the paramedics' arms. He was wearing a diaper that seemed out of place for a boy his age, and his breathing was barely perceptible. They began resuscitation efforts right there on the tiled floor, while another officer cleared the room. Broken drywall lined one wall, and the tile was stained in patches that told their own story. Near the washer sat a stack of worn pet pads, some used, arranged in a way that suggested this space had served a purpose far beyond its design. On the wall hung handmade charts covered in markers and stickers, tracking what appeared to be a child's daily behavior points. Outside, a small group of neighbors had gathered, pulled from their living rooms by the noise and flashing lights. Among them was Christina Miranda, standing barefoot on the driveway, crying so hard her body shook. Inside, the paramedics continued working, calling out times and vitals that kept falling lower. The lead medic finally looked up at the officer nearest him and shook his head. After several long minutes, the effort stopped. 10-year-old Michael Miranda was pronounced at the scene. The medical examiner was notified, and the home became a crime scene. Christina remained on the ground while her husband, Jonathan Miranda, stood nearby, silent, his face unreadable. Detectives arrived soon after and began documenting everything. They took photographs of the laundry room from every angle, collected items from the trash bin, and marked off the damaged wall. What they saw did not resemble the site of a sudden medical emergency. It looked more like a place where suffering had been routine, because what they found in that laundry room suggested that Michael's death wasn't sudden at all. It had been building for months, hidden in plain sight, behind a closed door no one thought to open. Michael Miranda was 10 years old, small for his age, with dark hair, a shy smile, and the quietness of a child who had already seen too much. His adoptive mother, Christina Miranda, often told people that Michael had survived a history of before joining their family. She said they adopted him out of compassion, hoping to give him the stability he had never known. And for a while, to those who knew them only from a distance, it looked like they had. Jonathan and Christina Miranda were described as a hardworking couple who seemed devoted to family. They attended church regularly, spoke kindly to neighbors, and often mentioned the challenges of raising children with difficult pasts. They had several kids at home, 4, possibly 6, according to later reports, and from the outside, their life appeared ordinary. But the more police learned about the household, the more it became clear that Michael's story didn't fit that picture. Neighbors recalled seeing the Miranda children playing together, but not once could they remember seeing Michael among them. One woman said she didn't even know another child lived there until police arrived that night. Michael's absence became one of the first things investigators noticed. There were no recent school records, no attendance logs, and no teachers who could speak about his behavior or progress. Every child in the home was homeschooled, and though that is not uncommon, it meant there were few adults outside the family who had contact with him. So, when detectives began piecing together his final months, they relied on testimony from within the home, and what they found contradicted nearly everything the Mirandas had claimed. According to the defense attorney later retained by the couple, Michael suffered from serious behavioral issues linked to a past brain tumor. They argued that he could be unpredictable, that he sometimes hit his head against walls or became aggressive toward others, and that the Mirandas had been managing complex medical and emotional needs that overwhelmed them. But investigators saw another possibility. They saw a child whose physical condition, thin, weak, and withdrawn, didn't align with the picture of a boy simply battling old health problems. They saw evidence of and prolonged isolation, not medical relapse. As they dug deeper, they realized Michael's life inside that house had been almost entirely invisible. There were no recent doctor visits recorded after his adoption, no counseling notes, and no sign of structured medical follow-up for his supposed brain condition. His world, by every account they could confirm, had narrowed to that small laundry room. Michael had come to the Mirandas for safety, but by the time investigators traced his story, the very home that promised him healing had become the place where he disappeared from view. And while the Mirandas claimed they were caring for a troubled child, the physical evidence, and what witnesses would soon reveal, told a story far more disturbing. When the initial documentation ended, investigators turned to the parents. Jonathan and Christina Miranda were seated separately at the police station. Jonathan remained calm, and when asked what had happened to Michael that night, he gave a simple response. He wanted a lawyer. From that moment on, he refused to answer any further questions. Christina's interview began differently. She appeared distraught, her voice trembling as she told detectives that Michael had not been feeling well. She said they had decided to keep him in the laundry room for a few days so they could monitor him closely and prevent him from disturbing the other children. But as officers pressed for details, asking how long he had been confined, when he last ate, or who last checked on him, her answers began to falter. She hesitated often and gave conflicting timelines. Investigators noticed that her version of events did not align with what they had seen inside the house. The laundry room showed clear signs of long-term habitation, the layers of grime, the charts tracking weeks of behavior, and the worn marks on the door that suggested frequent movement or restraint. Nothing about that space indicated a child temporarily resting there for just a few days. When detectives confronted Christina with these inconsistencies, she stopped speaking, and then requested an attorney as well. The interview ended, leaving detectives with more questions than answers. When detectives began interviewing the children, they knew this part of the case would determine everything. The Mirandas' other children were the only people who had lived inside that house long enough to know what really happened to Michael. Each was separated, placed in a quiet room with an investigator and a counselor present. None of them seemed ready to talk at first. It took time and gentle reassurance before the first child began to speak. The stories came out slowly, tangled at first, but once one of them started talking, the others began to add their own memories. What they described painted a picture that none of the detectives could have imagined. "He got hit every day," one of the children said. "Please don't tell my parents I told you." That plea alone told investigators more than any evidence could. It revealed fear, deep, constant fear of what might happen if their parents found out they had spoken. The children explained that Michael had lived in the laundry room for a long time, far longer than the few days their mother had claimed. They said he slept on the floor near the washer, and that he wasn't allowed to come out except to use the bathroom or perform small chores. Sometimes, they said, he didn't even get that chance. He was forced to stand for hours, facing the wall, with his arms raised above his head until they trembled. If he lowered them, he was struck again. The children described how their parents used different tools, sometimes a wooden paddle, sometimes a rubber one with a metal strip hidden inside. When Michael cried, they said he was told to be quiet or it would get worse. Detectives asked how often these things happened, and the children's answers were immediate: every day. It wasn't punishment for one mistake, they said. It was a routine. The smallest thing could set it off. As the interviews continued, the children described how their parents would sometimes lift Michael by his feet and drop him to make him stop crying. When he soiled himself, they didn't clean him or change him. He stayed that way for hours, sometimes all night. They said that the smell from the laundry room was so strong that the younger ones tried not to walk near the door. But they didn't dare complain, because they had been warned not to speak about what happened inside that room. Detectives wrote in their notes that the children's testimonies matched perfectly with what had been discovered at the scene: the pet pads, the fecal stains, the broken drywall, and the behavior charts. Each child's account aligned with the timeline of the injuries found on Michael's body. None of them contradicted the other. That moment revealed the depth of control Jonathan and Christina Miranda had exercised over their household. The children had learned to see suffering as discipline and silence as safety. At the Bezar County Medical Examiner's office, the examination of Michael Miranda's body began the morning after his death. The investigators who had stood in that laundry room waited anxiously for confirmation of what they already suspected. They hoped, for even a moment, that the truth might be less horrific than it appeared. But it wasn't. The autopsy confirmed every fear the detectives had carried out of that house. Michael was severely underweight for his age, his small frame showing signs of long-term malnutrition. His ribs and bones showed repeated trauma over time. Both legs bore similar evidence, and one arm hung unnaturally, dislocated at the shoulder in a way that could not have been caused by a simple fall. As the team continued their work, they found more details that told a story of endurance and pain. There were faint lines across his torso, some new, others fading. The body of a child who had fallen ill or suffered a single accident. It was the body of a boy who had endured repeated injury, isolation, and hunger. Then came the finding that explained his final moments. The examiner determined that Michael's lower intestine had ruptured. The tear had caused internal bleeding and infection that spread rapidly through his system, leaving him unable to recover even if help had come sooner. It was the final injury, the one that ended his life, but it wasn't the first. The medical team concluded that it had likely been caused to his abdomen, and that the pattern of his internal injuries matched the description of what his siblings had already told investigators. When detectives received the report, they gathered back at the station late that afternoon. The lead investigator spread the photos and autopsy summaries across the table, while the rest of the team stood in silence. And by the end of that week, affidavits were drafted and submitted to the district attorney's office. Each report strengthened the case, and by the morning of October 1st, 2025, after a full week of review by prosecutors, the decision was made to move forward. Arrest warrants were signed for Jonathan and Christina Miranda, charging them with capital murder of a person between 10 and 15 years old, the most serious charge possible under Texas law. That evening, a convoy of unmarked police vehicles rolled quietly down Cielo Ranch Drive. Jonathan appeared first as officers instructed him to step outside. Christina followed a few steps behind, clutching a sweater against her chest, her eyes fixed on the ground. At the Bexar County Jail, both Jonathan and Christina were booked and processed within hours. Their mugshots were released shortly afterward, each parent facing the camera with the same weary, vacant expression. A judge reviewed the case overnight and set their bail at $1.5 million each, effectively ensuring they would remain behind bars pending trial. Outside, news had already begun to spread. Reporters from local stations had gathered near the property as the arrests were made, their cameras capturing the moment the couple was escorted into police vehicles. Within hours, headlines began appearing across Texas. San Antonio parents charged with capital murder of adopted son.
Before we go, we want to get you to some breaking news. A married couple is facing charges of capital murder tonight. It comes after their 10-year-old adopted son died in their home last week. KENS 5's Vanessa Croy just heard from police and joins us live with the details. Vanessa?
Isis, what a tragic, devastating story that we just heard. These two parents, adoptive parents, are charged with capital murder in the death of their 10-year-old son, and officers believe the went on at least a year. Now take a look. This is 34-year-old Jonathan Miranda and 32-year-old Christina Miranda, both facing capital murder charges. Police tell us that on September 24th, around 9:22, officers went to the 5600 block of Cielo Ranch, that's on the northeast side, for reports of an unresponsive child. When they got there, EMS crews tried to save the child, but he did not survive his injuries. After investigators started looking into the case, they realized this child was a victim of continuous for at least a year. So right now, investigators say they are still trying to put together the pieces of what exactly happened. The medical examiner is now charged with finding a final determination of death. And before we go, Isis, we do want to say that they tell us there are other children in that home, and right now the investigation is ongoing to see if they were victims as well.
By October 2025, the case of Jonathan and Christina Miranda had entered its next and most critical stage. Both remained in custody at the Bezar County Jail, held without release since their arrest a week earlier. Each faced a single but devastating charge: capital murder of a person between the ages of 10 and 15. A classification that carried the possibility of life imprisonment without parole, or even the death penalty under Texas law. The final autopsy report had not yet been made public, and the full CPS file, which could contain crucial details about the family's history, adoption process, and prior investigations, is still under legal review. Meanwhile, detectives continue combing through the family's electronics: phones, tablets, and computers seized from the home on Cielo Ranch Drive. Investigators hope to find records, messages, or online searches that could clarify how long Michael's mistreatment had gone on, or whether either parent had documented it in any form. Forensic technicians worked carefully, tracing login histories and encrypted files, knowing that digital evidence could either strengthen the prosecution's case or complicate it further. So, as the case moved forward, both sides prepare for a long and complex legal battle, one that would unfold slowly with months of evidence review, hearings, and motions before any trial date could even be set. And while the paperwork continues to move through the system, Michael's name remains on the public's mind, his story serving as a painful reminder of what happens when a child's suffering remains unseen for too long. And now, we'd like to hear from you. What do you think could have changed the outcome of this case? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every one of them, because every perspective matters. If this story moved you, take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for spending this time with